Tonight is the beginning of a whole series of talks on the Heart Sutra. How many of you have heard of the Heart Sutra? Please raise your hand. Okay. How many of you have never heard of the Heart Sutra? Okay. Okay. So tonight's talk being the first of a whole series. I don't know how many talks I'll give, but we reserved for the whole rest of the year, since I'll be talking one time per month. So it sounds like it's a long text, but it's actually very short. But it's very condensed. And I thought tonight that I'll give some basic background information about the text. Can you all hear me, by the way? Maybe it should. It's quiet. Maybe raise the volume a little bit. Okay. To situate the text. It's important to situate, to understand the context of certain teachings, as with everything else. Very often in our lives, the things that we've heard, the things that people do, the context determines the meaning and the function. It's the context that's important. Without the context, it's very easy to be confused. You know, it's like looking at Picasso paintings. If you look at Picasso paintings where he flattens three-dimensionality, you would draw some wrong conclusions about that. You would say, this person doesn't know anything about art. Right? So you have to situate Picasso paintings in the context of the evolution of fine art, beginning with realism, romanticism, impressionistic, which is beginning to be a little bit abstracted, like exploring perceptual art, the nature of perception, where three-dimensionality is still kind of in place. And then with Picasso come along, you begin to understand the dismantling of the notion of three-dimensionality. The concept of perspectivism. Does that make sense? And then, after Picasso, people will come out with other expressions. So same thing with the Heart Sutra. Heart Sutra, the Sanskrit is Prajnaparamita Hridaya Sutra. Hridaya is the heart. So it belongs to the Prajnaparamita genre of literature, Buddhist text. So I'd like to first provide the context for this genre of text, its essence, its form, and its function. So from the Chan perspective, or the Zen perspective. So, the Prajnaparamita literature, the earliest evidence that we have 1st century BCE. And of course, we know the Buddha, the historical Buddha. We can date him to roughly 5th century BCE, so about 400 years after him. And his teachings continue to evolve. Some of his earlier teachings address the notion of suffering, how to identify the cause of suffering, the fuel that perpetuates our anguish, our suffering, and how to dismantle it. Right? So some of the early teachings focus on 3 things. Identifying what is suffering, and its counterpart, their essence, as impermanent, and by extension, selfless. It's called the 3 seals, like a stamp seal of the fundamental Buddhist teaching, the most important. Suffering, impermanence, and no self. The relationship of these 3. I'll spend a few minutes talking about, and then how to understand them and their usefulness. So the suffering that the Buddha identified, and its causes, it's not really physical discomfort, pain, although that could be included. It's more of a kind of psychological and emotional distress, anguish that we feel. And this distress that he identified, it's of many different types. The distress from possessing something and or someone, and the inevitability of losing that. The distress or dis-ease of meeting someone or encountering things that we really don't want to encounter. And also the suffering of losing, possessing, inability to hold on to that which we love. So all of these are emotional, psychological, not necessarily physiological. The Buddha, for example, was one who reached full awakening. But it is said that he, in the early texts, he had a chronic headache. So what? Full awakening, but have migraines? How many of you have migraines? A couple people. and some of his disciples. Great accomplishment. But some of them died a tragic death. But in the midst of these physiological, circumstantial stressors of life, the Buddha and his disciples were at peace. Where does that peace come from? It's not being oblivious to what is happening, running away from what's happening. The peace comes from embodying, awakening and embodying the reality of how things are. Seeing the truth of how things are. And the early teachings spoke about this truth from the perspective of time and space. Temporally describe this truth as impermanence. Impermanence. It sounds negative, but it's not necessarily pessimistic. Impermanence can merely refer to possibilities, right? Freshness, new beginnings. That's impermanence. Right? But if we examine the way we act, the way we relate to ourselves and other people, we live our life contrary to freshness, new beginnings, impermanence. How? In the ways in which we reify, solidify, congeal, grasp, identify, possess things that are changing. So we live as if instead of freshness, new beginnings, new possibilities, we live through the filter of wanting things to stay the way they are. Right? That is the cause of suffering. Right? So, very recently, actually, yesterday morning, I got a text from my student. Her whole apartment complex burned down. It's devastating. Everyone in that apartment complex, in the middle of the night, Sunday morning, 2 a.m., have to rush out. They didn't even have time to pack. So, causes of suffering. Right? And you can imagine how she felt. Right? Very traumatic. The adrenaline flushing through her. I woke up early in the morning. I don't look at my cell phone text, but I saw it in the morning later. And I called her immediately to understand the situation, where she's at, and so on. So I found out that she's actually okay. Her practice has allowed her to not get bewildered and be able to have some grounding in the present moment and beginning to see what needs to be done. So she called the insurance. Luckily she had renter's insurance. Those of you who don't have renter's insurance, please invest in rental insurance. So the maximum she can claim is $20,000. So if she held on to her possessions, her past, her identity of the space, the abode where she lived, all of these things that makes up who she is. We identify ourselves to relationship with the space we're in, right? You know what I'm talking about, right? When you go back to your parents' house, that same space, somehow you're kind of just put into that same dynamic. You're a child again. You relate to your mom. So we kind of, very subtly, we identify our sense of self through the space, through time. The pictures that we see, the objects that we possess. So I told her, very fortunate, you got rental insurance. Now, it's a new beginning. You get $20,000 to buy new clothes, buy new furniture, to start everything again, afresh, without having to clean everything. She was like, yeah. New possibilities. Everything's like that. Everything's like that in life. But the ways in which we strategize to hold on to these identities of who we are, we think we are, inevitably causes suffering. So impermanence is not necessarily negative. It's liberative. It opens up new possibilities. It is the hinge. It is the hinge, like a door. Through grasping, we'll suffer. If we see it as new possibilities, new beginnings, the impermanence, no self, liberation, which is the truth of how things are. Everything changes. Everything's new possibilities. That's a temporal perspective. Another Buddhist way of explaining things is spatial. We are made up of everything else. Interdependent. Interdependent. We exist in a network. Like this cup is made up of non-cup. The cup is aluminum. This cup has been with me about 30 years. 30 years. Still pretty useful. My teacher gave it to me. This cup is made up of non-cup. There's aluminum, there's plastic. Right? There's all these different conditions, factory, designer, and all these different things that made up this cup. Same thing with you. You belong to the world. The world is you. All the different conditions coming together. You exist independent on other conditions. So that's a spatial perspective, explanation. In other words, you are relationships. You are the embodiment of relationships. Right? For that reason, there's no fixed, reified, unchanging, independently existing self. Me, I, mine. So from the temporal, and the spatial perspective the Buddha gave the teaching of early Buddhism. As the teaching evolved, he gave those teaching in the most simple, direct way. As the teaching evolved, meeting new circumstances, challenges, his teaching became more refined, and more profound, deeper. The deeper layers of implications of dependent existence, interdependent existence. So the Prajnaparamita literature, the earliest we have is the Prajnaparamita text in 8,000 lines. The Sanskrit is Ashtashrika Prajnaparamita Sutra, 8,000 lines. Took this interdependence and pushed it further. To expound the teaching of emptiness. In the early text, emptiness, shunya or shunyata, is rarely used. On those occasions in which it was used, it's understood in a very narrowly confined context of absence of something, like the lesser or the larger Sunyata or Sunya Sutra. The Buddha gave teaching on meditation on emptiness. But the way he taught it is to discern the presence of something in counter-distinction to the absence of something. In other words, there's a pairing, there's a dualistic pairing, leading progressively deeper into meditative states. Right? For example, I'm going to change the context. The Buddha taught that the lesser emptiness sutra in the context of the forest in which he dwelled. Noticed in the forest, the absence of the city, the hustle and bustle. Noticing the animals, the absence of something else, layer by layer. So that would be like, all of you, when you came into this room, you notice maybe the first thing, the different cushions and the different people, right? So the presence of something, in the contemplative mode of meditation. The presence of something can only exist through the absence, the spaciousness of this room. So it's a perceptual shift. Instead of noticing all the people in this room, start to shift your perception to noticing the spaciousness of this room. So once you dive in and settle into the spaciousness of this room, the wide expanse spaciousness, that becomes the presence. Right? And the individual people and furniture and cushions and all that becomes the absence. Does that make sense? But in noticing the spaciousness of this room, the presence of that, if you settle into that, you'll come to understand awareness. Right? It only exists independent on awareness. Right? This moment to moment to moment freshness of consciousness. Once you shift the perceptual experience to the freshness of this moment, that becomes present. And even the spaciousness becomes absent. Does that make sense? So the Buddha taught it in that way, in this pairing, presence, absence, presence, absence, presence, absence, which is very different than the meaning of emptiness in the Prajnaparamita. It went from a method to the nature of things. The defining nature of all existence, of all things. If you push this line further of this perceptual experience, what is present, what is absent, and the absence becomes presence. And so on. A person would enter. So the point of the early teachings, the person enters into this meditative absorption on emptiness. So it's kind of a method. It's kind of a samadhi, concentration state. So you may kind of settle. A person hearing this may think, well, it's just awareness then, it's just consciousness, the ground of existence. No. Consciousness itself, the presence of consciousness, is dependent on the sense faculty. Sense faculty. So what does the sense faculty depend on? The presence of the sense faculty depend on other conditions. The more you push, the more you kind of come back to reality of there is no self. There is no self. Yet, there's just this free flow functioning, moment to moment, of the sense organ coming in contact with the sense object, giving rise to moment-to-moment consciousnesses. Right? There's not a single place in which you can pinpoint as the essence. In other words, it's this tripartite relationship between organ, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, object, sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, thought. The interaction of these two give rise to momentary consciousnesses, momentary awarenesses of the eye, of sight, of sound, of taste, smell, touch, so on. So in this tripartite relationship, there's just this wonderful flow of interdependence. Right? No ownership, no possessor, no controller, no witnesser. Just this presence in absence. Absence in presence. But still, it's a kind of a method, sequential method. And in the Prajnaparamita literature, emptiness became the defining feature of how things are. and how things are is ungraspable, unobtainable, unpossessable. Non-abiding. Truth. And people usually, scholars and practitioners, when they talk about kind of early teachings, the role of emptiness in early teachings, they usually talk about it in terms of this method of practice. And they cite the lesser or the larger emptiness sutta. But my teacher has found in the Agamas, the early text, the closest equivalent of the Prajnaparamita notion of emptiness in early text. It's in my book, Reimagining Chan. I have a whole section talking about the Prajnaparamita. So let me read you this passage. This is in the Ekottara Agama. And the text goes, all things return to emptiness. That is, there's no self. There's no beings. There's no living. There's no lifespan. There's no great being. There's no ordinary being. There's no form, and there's no appearances. There's no men, nor women. Why? Because the characteristics of self are no characteristics. Characteristics of a person, sentient beings, and lifespan are all free from characteristics. This is a very, very rare passage. Probably the only one in the whole early Buddhist canon. And he points to a particular logic of the Prajnaparamita literature. It focuses on a dismantling and deconstruction of appearances. Right? Early Buddhism and the different traditions from that, particularly one school, very widespread. After the Buddha's passing, about 200 years, this school became one of the most dominant traditions within Buddhism in India. It's called the Sarvastivada. Sarvastivada tradition gave rise to 7 different lineages. It belongs to one of the conservative traditions. These 7 different lineages, one version of the 7 is the predecessor of what we now know as Theravada. So it can be traced back to Sarvastivada, one of the elders, the Staviras. They have deconstructed all phenomenal appearances into dharmas, discrete things. It's almost like an atomic theory of analyzing the world, right? Human beings are made up of 5 discrete dharmas, aggregates: form, sensation, perception, volition, consciousness. And ever finer kind of elemental existence. The whole world constitutes 75 different dharmas. Dharma here does not mean teaching. It means phenomenal appearances, characteristics. And this is the point of response or critique of the these appearances, discrete appearances themselves are constructs. They exist only in name. So the Prajnaparamita took a different approach in teaching freedom, awakening, emptiness. Early teachings, temporal, spatial. Right? Cup is made up of non-cup, all the different conditions. It continue to change. The Prajnaparamita says the different conditions themselves are mere constructs. They're mere appearances. These appearances themselves are completely fabricated. For example, the text that I read, men, women, there are no men. There are no women. There is no young, there's no old. So the cup is made up of non-cup. There is no cup. Cups made up of, there's plastic, there's aluminum, there's the factory that produces all these different conditions. They're constructs. They're words. It's like saying gaga goo goo. What does gaga goo goo mean? The only reality to gaga goo goo is that we have a consensus of what gaga goo goo means. Same thing with these words. The words and language in which we use, we invest so much of our energy in this consensus to compartmentalize the world into discrete things. They're complete fabrication. Words and language are artificial. They don't actually point to reality. Right? This is a floor. My floor. You may think this is my floor. It's my cushion. Right? Who says this is floor? This floor could be your bed. A different word. Right? Chair. Table. To more difficult things that we have trouble with, like this is my friend and that's my enemy. These labels that we put on things, these overlays, has actually nothing to do with reality. They only make sense when there's self-referential attachment. Friend and foe only make sense if they're good to you or not. Right? But to someone else, your friend could be the foe. Your foe could be the friend. Right? So where's the demarcation, the line drawn? Right? But we invest so much into words and language. We invest, in other words, so much to our fantasies, our fabricated overlay of how things are. So this is reality, right? We don't actually see reality. We don't actually experience it. What we experience is our filter, our overlay of reality, our narratives and constructs. That's where the suffering. So it's this shift. Right? How things actually are is completely different than the overlays, the words and language. So all the features that we ascribe to things, from good, bad, having, lacking, gaining, losing, suffering, happiness, men, women. All of these categories, which by nature segregates, divide. That's the nature of words and language. Polarize. That's the nature of words and language. That's where suffering comes from. So the way to dismantle this way of relating to ourselves. I'm doing good in meditation. Oh, that was a terrible moment of sitting. I wish last week I had a good sitting. I wish I could get that back. This kind of stories, narrative built upon something that doesn't exist. Okay. Everything from your memory of your childhood to your sense of identity. Even neuroscience tells us that our memory is completely fabricated, constructed, and they continue to change. And selectively, based on the moment we generate them, highlight certain things and conceal other things. It's kind of like made up as we go. You know. They all have something common. This self-referencing. Once self-referencing happens, there's always othering. There's always polarization. So the Prajnaparamita took a radical different stance. Doesn't even get involved with dissecting, deconstructing things into different conditions and dependently origination. It doesn't even get into that. All things, no characteristics, unfathomable, inconceivable. From the first Prajnaparamita text, fragments are found in the 1st century BCE, then we can probably safe to say that it existed earlier. By the time an idea make it into written text, that idea probably circulated long for some time, maybe 100 years or something. So from the earliest Prajnaparamita text to 8,000 lines to this other phase, before the 4th, 5th century, in which a great expansion of the Prajnaparamita literature, 100,000 lines. The teaching, 100,000 lines, 25,000 lines, 18,000 lines. So it's a whole genre of text. Right? Roughly, Prajnaparamita literature can be extended to about 1,000 years. Right? But the first, so after the 400 years, 300-400 years, we start to see this great expansion. And beginning probably 5th century, we see the emergence of very short Prajnaparamita text, a condensation, if you will. And that is when the Heart Sutra emerged. Right? And texts like the Diamond Sutra, right? They belong to this phase. 4th, 5th century. Right? And later on, as in India, as a kind of esoteric, tantric element became prevalent, widespread in India, then we see that type of teachings make it into the Prajnaparamita literature too, right? All the way up to the 7th, 8th century. So the text that we have, the Prajnaparamita Hridaya Sutra, is about 4th, 5th century Indian text, translated by Xuanzang, based on Kumarajiva's. Kumarajiva was one of the greatest translators. He was kidnapped to China because he's such a great master. The Chinese kidnapped him to bring it back to China to translate text. So he translated numerous texts, and Xuanzang, the great pilgrim who went to India, I'm sure you heard popular stories of him. Journey to the West, Monkey King, right? That's centered around Xuanzang in the 7th century. He condensed the Prajnaparamita text into what we have now, the version that we chant, which we'll do in a few minutes, right? The Heart Sutra. But being in the 7th century, we already have record of Xuanzang using the Heart Sutra as a method as a method of personal protection. At the end of the Heart Sutra, there's a mantra, there's a dharani, right? That's kind of a spell. So he used it personally. So 7th century. That's basically Tantric Buddhism emerged around 4th, 5th century. 7th century is the kind of pinnacle of Tantric Buddhism. So we already see him influenced by that. So the version we have is kind of like 7th century, right? Xuanzang's time, which has the mantra at the end. In the Chan tradition, the Prajnaparamita Sutra plays a central role. It's the mark of a shift away from the Lankavatara Sutra. Lankavatara Sutra is also a Mahayana text, but it's a mixture text. It's very hard to pinpoint the genre. It's a kind of intermediary text between Yogacara teachings, the consciousness-only teachings, and the Buddha nature teachings. And that was supposedly, that's the text that Bodhidharma, the first ancestral master of the Chan Zen tradition in China, 28th counting from India, but the first one in China, that's the text that he brought to China. Lankavatara. So from the first ancestral master to the 5th one, the Lankavatara Sutras, very influential. Its views on Buddha nature, its views on the constructedness of reality in the consciousness-only school. I've written on all this. If you're interested, you can explore the website. I'm not going to go into explaining that. Just want to provide this overarching context. The 6th ancestral master, Huineng, because he was awakened, he was arguably the most important Chan master in its whole history. His name was Huineng. He was awakened by the Diamond Sutra, which is part of the Prajnaparamita literature. So from then on, there's a shift into the Prajnaparamita. So I've spoken a little bit about the the strategy of the Prajnaparamita text. Its teachings on emptiness, shunyata. Not taking the temporal approach, not taking the spatial approach in explaining the teaching of shunyata, the emptiness. It took this radical approach of the very constructedness of nature. Right? How do we construct reality? We constructed the words and language as linguistic beings. So, I want to speak a little bit about shunyata now. Okay? I want to talk about it in terms of Chan perspective of the essence of the Buddhist teachings, the characteristics or the form, and the function. From the Chan Zen perspective, the essence of the Buddhist teaching is shunyata. Of course, this includes, but is not limited to, no self, selflessness, which is early teachings. It's not the core of the Mahayana Chan Zen teachings, which is shunyata. The early teachings, as I said, deconstructed reality in order to teach non-attachment, how to free oneself from suffering, taught impermanence. That's the hinge. You grasp, reify, compartmentalize your experiences into things, resisting the free flow nature of how things are, impermanent. The hinge leads to suffering. Adapting, working with impermanence, recognizing the changeability. You realize no self. That's the early teachings. Shunyata is a teaching, a move from like a method to self-nature. How the true nature of who we are is freedom. Is freedom. Cannot be compartmentalized. Cannot be explained in terms of characteristics or features. It's just freedom. Shunyata. It sounds like, in translation, shunyata means emptiness. It sounds pessimistic. Does it sound pessimistic? No? Okay. How many of you feel emptiness? Empty. All things are empty. Sounds not so pleasant. Emptiness does not mean voidness. Does not mean non-existence. It does not mean negativity. Well, what does it mean then? Whatever we come up with, non-existence, void, nothingness, absence. These are words, labels. They're constructs. As soon as we put a label on something, we kill it. But labels, words, are all that we've ever known. This is the way in which we feel about ourselves. The stories we tell about ourselves, childhood, how we were raised, they're all contingent on words and language. So Prajnaparamita presents this fundamental distrust to words and language. Fundamental challenge to the ways in which we construct reality. Arbitrary, right? Goo goo gaga. Who says goo goo gaga means anything? Right? Some people think, you call me goo goo gaga? How dare you? Right? It's like, you're a jerk. You know, well, you're my best friend, BFF. BFF sounds good, right? Jerk sounds. These are just syllables, right? So shunyata means freedom, ungraspable, inconceivability. Right? So the form of meditation that accompany this tradition of prajnaparamita doesn't even get involved with what is present, what is absent now. First notice what is present, and then notice, the people, the cushion, the furniture, and then realize the spaciousness that allow them to be. It doesn't even get involved with that. It doesn't even get involved with labeling, identifying, wandering thought, storytelling. It's this radical way of meditation, of featurelessness, signlessness, ingraspability. So if you sit, once you settle, as an expedient means, relaxing, grounding into the reality of this moment. Don't label, no stories, no words and language, no past and future, no present, no good or bad, no judgment. It's this radical practice of freshness, non-abiding. Soon as you identify or become aware that the mind is veering off into labeling how you're doing, let go. Such radical, moment to moment to moment to moment, letting go. Letting go sounds negative, right? As soon as you catch yourself saying negative, it's negative, let that go. Right? Whatever labeling, whatever words and language, stories you want to tell, whatever way you want to reify, solidify, try to compartmentalize, put this experience into some kind of container, allow it to be free. So how wonderful is that? Nothing sticks. It's the practice of non-abiding. Like the Diamond Sutra says, non-abiding, yet mind arising. What is this mind arising? Traditionally, it's understood as bodhicitta, compassion. Compassion arises out of wisdom of non-abiding. Right? But at the working end of practice, in meditation, for example, it means nothing sticks, yet wakeful. So as you sit, it's just this moment-to-moment wakefulness. See? Very advanced type of meditation. Instead of narrowly focusing the mind on some object like the breath, like the body, or some sensation, you meditate on the nature of breath, the nature of body, the nature of sensation, which cannot be contained. A dismantling of all containers. Reification, which is just freedom, moment-to-moment freedom. That is an approximation, alignment with prajna, which is wisdom. Does that make sense? Yeah. In my talk, this series, we'll talk about how to actually meditate on prajna paramita. So I'll do a guided meditation. Hold you by the hand. Take you stage by stage into this. But here, just a prelude. Right? It challenges the very way we try to construct, define, storytell about what we're experiencing. Words and language. Right? Words and language. That's why Chan, Zen tradition, the first axiom of the Chan tradition is what? First out of the four main principles of Chan. Chan is a tradition not dependent on words and language. It's a tradition of prajna, wisdom, independent from words and language, scriptures, more words, more languages. The paradox of this, if you haven't picked it up, is that the Prajna Paramita literature, 100,000 lines talking about emptiness, 25,000 lines, right? 18,000 lines, right? From all different angles, in case you don't get it, right? Every possible way in which we kind of compartmentalize our life dismantles. So the Chan tradition, they got that message. Okay. Tradition, independent from scriptures, not contingent on words and language. Right? It's a direct pointing to the heart. Hridaya. Heart. Right? Heart sutra. Direct pointing. That's the third line. No words and language, independent from scriptures, direct pointing. The fourth principle of Chan is become a Buddha. Which means awake. Which means once the fabrication of words and language and our attachment to it is dismantled, directly experiencing reality in that moment, in alignment with how things actually are. Freedom. Buddha. Buddha just means awake. So it's a kind of condensation in a very Chinese way, the Chan way, of the Prajnaparamita teachings. Right? So that's the essence. In terms of the characteristics, from this essence, a feature that's very prominent in the Prajnaparamita text, like the Heart Sutra, is Bodhi mind, altruistic compassion, selfless compassion. This is the way wisdom manifests, actually. You could say, well, wisdom, it sounds pessimistic. Pessimistic is a word. Right? It's a word. It means nothing. It means nothing. If we try to encapsulate the teaching of wisdom through the stupid word called pessimistic or negative, that's like trying to compare the vast luminosity of the sun with the light of a firefly. Or like a cigarette lighter, the light. It's incomparable. Incomparable. Right? It is precisely because of this freedom that all beings are liberated, because that's your true nature. Try to compartmentalize, put your true nature into a capsule of this or that. You do yourself a disservice. Sell yourself short. You are so much more than what you think you are. The overlay? No, I'm too tall, I'm too fat, I'm too wide, I'm too thin, I'm too dumb, I'm too smart. I'm too old, I'm too young. These words means nothing to your freedom, to your true potential, which is inexhaustible, inconceivable. Don't sell yourself short. This inconceivable characteristics that's within you can manifest as great compassion, inexhaustible compassion. And that is bodhicitta, the aspiration of compassion for all things, for all beings. And the full realization of what it means to be a Buddha, to be free, to be freed. Right? All you need to do is to challenge the ways in which we narrowly think we can, cannot, we have, we don't, we lack, we gain, we lost, all the polarizing ways in which we think about ourselves. So much more. They mean nothing. They mean nothing. This freedom manifests in each moment. A lot of people, I was talking with someone, one of my students, how almost everyone rests in their own comfort zone. Do you know what I'm talking about? Some people's comfort zone is, I'm useless, I'm worthless. Yeah, they don't want to be useless, they don't want to be worthless, but they're so settled into it. It's what defines them. Whatever narrative, whatever comfort zone you feel, you don't have to be that. The clearest way in which we manifest ourselves is, a lot of people, they feel a sense of loneliness, right? Fundamentally alone. So they want to be seen. They want to be seen. They want to be heard. The need to be cared for. You think about how devastating these three words are. How you define yourself. That means I'm not seen. I'm not heard. I'm not loved. If you define yourself that way, oh, great suffering. Great suffering. These words, the power of words, right? You gotta challenge that. You gotta challenge that. In truth, already seen. In everything. In everyone's life, you're there. All the people in your life, you're there already. Right? All the people, the things that your interactions, you make a difference. You already made your mark. in other people's lives. Do you believe that? You already see. Already heard. And the love is not like, oh, I want a hug. Not that kind of love. That's just fundamental connection that we have with all beings. That connection, it's already there. Right? Through Guagu, for example, you see Master Shen Yan. You'll see Master Shen Yan. Through Master Shen Yan, my teacher, you will see Master Ling Yuan and Dong Chu. Generation, generation, generation. In this moment, without containers, without reified stories and notions and ideas, the overlay that I talk about, in this moment, there's freedom, there's love. That great compassion. So that is the true characteristics, the form of Prajnaparamita. What about the function? So the Prajnaparamita literature, the essence, prajna, shunyata, emptiness. The characteristics, compassion, bodhicitta. The function is upaya, upaya, skillful means, very prominent in the Prajnaparamita text, referring to from this freedom and the interaction with sentient beings comes this skillful means. That means the flexibility of the teachings, the adaptability of the teachings. Prajnaparamita literature. These three are the distinct features of the Prajnaparamita text. And we will examine a condensed version of those 100,000, 25,000 lines in the Heart Sutra. Consists of, only several dozen words. Upaya is the function. Unbound, untethered, unobstructed by words and language. There's wisdom manifest through words and language. Right? Through words and language. So you'll see in the Heart Sutra that we'll read next, we'll chant together. The Bodhisattva, the great Bodhisattva compassion, attains nothing, therefore attains everything. Right? Right? So that's the function of skillful means. Gains nothing, therefore gains everything. All things are without features, without characteristics. Therefore, they have the characteristics of freedom. Right? So this kind of wonderful wordplay logic that transcends logic. So for this first talk, I've basically talked about a little bit about history and a little bit about the Prajnaparamita, its evolution, and the essence, the form and characteristics, and the function. Right? In Chinese, it's 体, 相, 用, essence, characters, and function. So, any questions?
She asks if you said that Prajnaparamita literature rejects the idea of dependent origination because it relies on reification.
Usually, the Prajnaparamita is explained through dependent origination. But that's only in the explanation of prajna, of emptiness. Otherwise, people will have no way to understand it. You see? So you have to explain it through the foundational teaching of dependent origination, which is relationships, interdependence. It can only be understood through words, and by using words, we have to talk about relationship, interdependence, causes and conditions. Right? But causes and conditions describes samsara. Sarah, causes and conditions, interdependence belongs to the world of samsara. It's not the experience of nirvana. It's words, constructs. See? So ultimately, shunyata is beyond dependent origination. But usually teachers, especially the scholastic tradition, they had to talk about dependent origination in order to understand shunyata. So that's kind of on a phenomenological level, right? In the world of phenomena. But the experiential is not phenomenological.